Hello, my name is Dave Gorman, and welcome to the Sarah O'Connell Show.
Welcome to the Sarah O'Connell Show.
Dave Gorman, welcome to the Sarah O'Connell Show. How are you today?
I am very well today. Today is one of those rare nights on tour where I was at home in the morning and I'll be home again tonight, and they're very, very precious days. They're lovely.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, it makes touring feel like no work at all. You just go out and do the fun bit and then go home again, which is good.
Yeah, it must get quite exhausting sort of being on tour and just not only doing the show, but just sort of being away from home and away from your stuff.
Yeah, the show is the fun part every day. That's just like, if you didn't enjoy that bit, you're in the wrong job. That's really just a joy to do. And then it's the travelling and the schlepping around and the lack of sleep and the being away from, in my case, my wife and child. That's the grind. That's the bit that makes it a job. If it was able to teleport in and be backstage at a theatre and walk on stage, we'd all be on tour permanently, because it's really good fun. Yeah.
True.
I saw you telling Greg and Alex that you never edit, everything's in, and I thought, wow.
But then after I did that, they started singing and dancing. They gave me more material to keep in.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. But I only keep their stuff in, so what I'll do is if I edit other people's stuff out, I put Greg and Alex in.
I got it, fine.
Yeah.
So if I'm really dull, you just get shots of Alex dancing.
They gave me about 20 hours of it, so I can just put that in there.
It's tempting to be dull on purpose, just to make that happen.
Yeah. It often does. I've got 100 videos of largely them.
Yeah. Well, I encourage you to use more of that. I don't feel that interesting. But
I think you are.
well, I'm not going to dance like Alex.
No one can. He's had lots of rehearsal.
He has. I've danced with Alex. There was a task that went unused in the series I was on where we had to choreograph a dance with Alex that has never seen the light of day.
Oh, really?
So somewhere out there is some footage of the two of us dancing together. A very avant-garde piece, but anyway.
It's very intriguing. So I've seen Alex do sort of different handshakes, hand gesture kind of things, and he definitely has the rhythm within him.
He does. He's the boy's got soul, definitely.
He has.
Yeah, you can't argue.
Couldn't possibly.
No.
Now you started doing comedy at about the age of 19, I believe.
Yes, not exactly at the age of 19. It wasn't on my birthday, but it was certainly in my 19th year on this planet. Yeah, I was at university and I had the opportunity to do a gig, and I did it. And unfortunately for everyone else, that first gig actually rarely went well. I was sort of 3 or 4 gigs in when I had a real stinker. Yeah. And I think if that had been my first experience, I probably would have given up and disappeared with my tail between my legs. But because I had 2 or 3 at the beginning that were actually quite good and exciting, it's very addictive when that happens. That's the thing that gets you going back every time.
Were you sort of into comedy before that? Had you seen a lot of live comedy?
I was massively into comedy. I used to... it's changed so much because nowadays most towns of a certain size would have a comedy club and whatever, and we didn't have one in my hometown. And even when I was a student in Manchester, there was only one weekly gig at the time, and that's a big city. But I was in a youth theatre when I was a kid, and we went to the Edinburgh Festival and did shows and stuff, and I saw my first live stuff there. The first comedian I ever saw live was Jeremy Hardy. Yeah. I'd never heard of the Perrier Award, but he won the Perrier Award that night. So I was a very young, very naive young man it was a friend who said, "Oh, I've got a spare ticket, do you want to come?" So I went along to this show, never heard of it before, sat down, watched it, it was amazing, and at the end of the night someone came on and gave him a trophy, and it seemed like the most exciting thing in the world. I don't know. I think everyone else in that room was there because he might win the trophy. Yeah. They were there on the hype. And me and my 3 friends weren't, and we just sat there and just had a whale of a time and loved it, and I'm still a big fan today. I think Jeremy Hardy's amazing, and that was the first thing I saw. And then for a few years, because we didn't have access to any live comedy in where I was growing up, me and a mate used to go up to Edinburgh just on our own steam for a week and see about 6 shows a day. We camped in the back of a van one year, we slept in the car one year. We would just spend all of our money on tickets and nothing on anything else, and see not all comedy but a lot of comedy, and about 6 shows a day. and overdose on it for a week and then go 51 weeks of the year without seeing any of it. But for that 1 week, we saw absolutely everything we could.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I'd love to do that. Just sort of park up in Edinburgh and just see as much as I can. And
it does feel like, I suppose the free fringe has made it possible again, because Edinburgh had got horribly expensive. And when I was a kid, I mean, it felt expensive to us, but we weren't rich kids and we could afford to see 5 or 6 shows a day. Yeah. And I don't think 10 years ago the equivalent child could afford to see 5 or 6 shows a day, because things had got a bit out of hand with ticket prices. But I think the free fringe has kind of revitalised it and made that possible again for people. And there's some really, really good shows on the free fringe as well.
Yeah, there really is. And there's loads of, because comedy, if it's funny, it's funny. And it doesn't matter if you know them or you don't, you can find this undiscovered talent and they can be hilarious, which I love.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing about Edinburgh, and I love the Edinburgh Fringe, and without it I wouldn't be where I am, because it's a place where you can take risks and do stuff and make something of yourself. And I couldn't have persuaded art centres to take a tour of mine. Well, one of the first sort of more avant-garde shows I did was a show all about the lyrics to the song Reasons to Be Cheerful by Ian Dury and the Blockheads. And I had absolutely no way of going to art centres and persuading them that this unknown comic with a show about something as weird as that was a good idea for them to book, because it isn't a good idea for them to book. They'd much rather, they feel much safer booking 3 or 4 comedians on a mixed bill, which is sort of a spread bet on it being a good night. But going to Edinburgh and starting with an audience of 5 every night and ending with an audience of 300 every night and getting some good reviews along the way gives you some ammunition to go to those art centres and go, this is worth booking. And that's how those first tours happened, because you build something in Edinburgh. There's something impossible about Edinburgh, because I still want to go every time I can, even if I'm not performing. I like to visit if I can. And I look through the theatre sort of side of the brochure, and I go, hey, there's still more theatre than there is comedy. And I look through it thinking, I'd like to see a really good play. And I have no way of knowing which of these 2,000 plays are on offer today are worth my coin. I have no way of penetrating it. And if I'm lucky, I'll get a couple of actor friends to sort of tap me up and go, this is good, that'll be good. Yeah. And I look at that and go, oh, right, that's what most people look at the comedy section thinking. I know most of the people involved in most of the shows, and I would have a guide as to what's going to be my taste or whatever. But the average punter is looking at it's just a morass of names, and every listing says it's brilliant, and half of them aren't, and half of them are, and it's completely impossible to tell from the outside. And I don't know how people find their way through it. It's an impossible mush of too much stuff. But that's also why, when you find something really good that you didn't know about before, it's really exciting.
Absolutely. And I think when shows kind of debut at Fringe, they don't necessarily have any reviews yet, and there's not much online buzz necessarily if you're one of the first audiences to see it. And I think there's some excitement in that, because it could be terrible, but it could be amazing. Absolutely.
To me, that is the joy of it. So for a while, I was on the board of the Edinburgh Fringe, and there was always a bit of paranoia that another festival was going to come along and steal their thunder. And my argument was always, they won't. Every other festival in the world is curated. Every other festival in the world, someone's going, oh, we'll have that show, we like that show, that sounds good, we'll book that. And a lot of the time, they're booking things that have been successful in Edinburgh, because they've been successful in Edinburgh and bringing them to their festival. The joy of Edinburgh is that it's a completely uncurated festival. Anyone can go up there and do anything, might bankrupt themselves doing it, but they're allowed to go and do it. That's why there's so much dross as well as so much gold, because it's a completely open market for anyone to go and do absolutely anything at. So you pay your money, you take your choice, but that's the joy of it, because it's uncurated. Things can happen that you can't. Everything else is cherry picking from the Fringe, and nothing else can take over it unless they have that same completely open sort of remit.
Yeah, because I think as an artist too, if only certain shows work, there'd be less creativity perhaps, and it'd be more formulaic, whereas people feel that they can experiment and they can try different things.
I think it's probably changed a little bit. Again, I think the ticket prices has been an issue, but for me, there was an absurdity, because you would spend so much money taking a show to Edinburgh. Everyone complains about it. I'm not sort of going, oh, woe is me. but you would do a show which couldn't possibly make money. I'd be playing like a 200-seat venue, and if I sold every ticket, I'd be a few £1,000s out of pocket, even if I sold out. And you're doing that because it's a trade fair, and it'd be worth it. You might get some other work off the back of it or whatever, and that's all fine. But there was an absurdity to the idea that most of the industry lives in London, most of the comics live in London, most of the comics are living and working in London most nights of the week. All of that industry could go and see them on their own doorstep anytime they wanted to. And instead, everyone ships up to Edinburgh, and everyone does their shows there. And so many people, comics, are doing a longer version of what you can see them doing every night in London. Yeah. And I didn't live in London myself, but I still thought, that's absurd. If you're going to spend all that money and take that risk, you should be taking a creative risk. What is the point of putting yourself in that kind of financial jeopardy if what you're going to do is a longer version of what all those people can see you doing in Camden that night, in Islington that night, and where, like, you have to take something they haven't seen before that is exciting to you, and that this is an opportunity to do that a club doesn't give you the opportunity to. Most club sets are 20 minutes, and the freedom of going, you've got a whole hour, do something you want, is how I ended up doing a show about the lyrics to the Ian Dury song Reasons to Be Cheerful, because that doesn't fit in a club set. It only fits in a theatre. It's a thing that's the opportunity. Do something surprising and exciting, and that they can't see the rest of the time. Otherwise, what is the point in everyone travelling 400 miles to be in the same city for this to happen? It makes no sense at all. So just kind of, if you're going to take a financial risk, I think you should be taking a kind of tangible creative risk with it.
Absolutely. It's very good advice for everybody watching.
Oh yeah, I mean, not for everyone. A lot of people aren't ever going to do an Edinburgh show, in which case that advice is useless to them.
Well, they might now.
Yeah, and here's some footage of Alex Horne dancing.
Now I'm going to add some, right? Of course I am. Now, speaking of which, when you kind of first started out, you did some poetry, and you also juggled kitchen plungers.
Yeah, you've done some research.
Yeah.
There's that weird I think there's a Steve Martin quote about everything you've ever learnt will come in useful at some point. And yeah, I juggled. I did it at the front end of my career, not the back end, I hope.
I was looking forward to that tonight, isn't it?
No, it's not gonna happen tonight. I was massively influenced by John Hegley as a comic poet. Yeah. He was one of the performers who really excited me in Edinburgh when I was first going up. And I think 19-year-old me doing stand-up was sort of a John Hegley tribute act. Nothing that was stolen from him, but attitude and sort of and format, I suppose. Yeah. And for a 19-year-old who didn't have any life experience, it was probably a really good technique, because the audience knew what poetry was, and they knew you were subverting it, and you didn't have to back it up with any huge life experience and whatever. So I could sort of get away with it. And it was a pretty good act, I think. It was sort of going all right. They had a weird bit of juggling sink plungers in as well, if I was doing 40. But 20, I was a pretty good sort of comic poet of sorts. And then a promoter in Manchester called Chris Coop booked me to support John at a gig in Stockport. And I was like, no, you can't put me on the same bill as John Hegley. It would be embarrassing to go on before him doing this tribute act to him. Like, the last thing an audience who've booked to see John Hegley want to see is another comic poet before him using some of the same rhythms and so, it's not right. And he was like, no, I really want you to do it. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'll do it on the condition that I'm going to do a new act, and you're okay with that. You have to shake my hand and say that you're happy to pay me to do something you haven't seen before, and I'm going to and so because I was too embarrassed to go on before John doing something that was so influenced by John, I wrote a whole new 20 for that gig, and I did that, and I've never done comic poetry since. That was the beginning of a whole new act, which I think I'm on my 4th iteration of what I do. I think I was a stand-up poet for a while, I was a dry one-liner merchant for a while, that's what I did on that gig and so on. I was like, it was all one-liners. Then it became sort of storytelling stand-up, then it became illustrated, then it became narrative theatre shows, and now it's become a sort of hybrid of those and illustrated stand-up with PowerPoint. And I look forward in 5 years' time to doing something else completely different. I
Absolutely.
don't know what it'll be, but you know.
It's exciting. I'm looking forward to watching it.
I'm Madonna, basically. I just reinvent myself.
You are?
Yeah.
You can't see it, but there's about 50 cones going on down there. Experimental conage.
Absolutely.
It's a true story. So after that, you became a writer and you wrote for the Mr. Merton show and the Far show as well. Do you find that doing that kind of stuff sort of gave you a wider knowledge of television production, or did it help shape your comedy in any way?
I think it did a bit. Yeah, I think Caroline was a hugely impressive person to work with. She had real innate understanding of television, and watching her resist some of the kind of pressure that TV producers would put on her to do things a certain way was always an interesting and exciting fight to witness. And they normally gave in to her, and she was always right. Her instinct about it was always good. The main experience of that, I mean, I was a pretty young man, and it was great company to be in. And there's a joy in writing stuff for someone when you know you couldn't use that material.
Right.
So an elderly Mancunian chat show host who is a lady, writing a joke for her because she's interviewing a weatherman, that there is no way I'd ever be thinking, oh, I wish I could have held on to that one and used it in my set. It would make no sense at all. So it was really easy to free yourself up and just think in a different head and do the job. Whereas I think I would have always found my ego would have got in the way of writing for a stand-up comic who was doing stand-up. That I would always be thinking, why am I giving him that? I could have held on to that, and I wouldn't have been very good at the job for that reason.
In 1999, you did a show called Better World, where you sought advice on how one person can make the world better.
Yeah.
Now it's 19 years after that ish.
Yeah.
How would you make the world better in 2019?
I don't think I'd do it by doing a show to find out. I don't think I really found out that much. It's very flattering. I still get people, because I toured it. I did it in Edinburgh in 1999. I toured it in 2000, and I toured it again in 2003.
Yeah.
But that's the last that show's been seen, and I still get emails and people in the street occasionally shouting at me about that particular show, which is very flattering. That's 15 years after anyone could possibly have seen it.
Yeah.
There'll still be occasional mentions of it. The thing I found out at the beginning of that, the first 3 responses I got, it's a complicated setup, but basically I'd written a letter to about 2,000 newspapers, and I think about 12 of them published it or something. Yeah. And the letter basically said, I'm one man, I've got time, energy and commitment. Tell me how you would make the world a better place and I'll do my best. And the first 3 responses I got, they all arrived in this PO box at the same time. One was about that thick wad of paper, and it was all stuff being printed off, and it was about white supremacy.
Yeah.
And there was not a lot I could do with it. There wasn't anything saying you should do this, you should do that. It was just basically horrible stuff about white supremacy. One was a letter saying, my husband and I found God in 1974 and we think you should invite God into your life. And the third was saying all freight should be on the canals. And I can't explain how it happened, but by the end of the show, the audience had emotionally invested in the idea that all freight should be on the canals, and they would leave the theatre chanting that all freight should be on the canals. And a few years ago, there was some initiative with the government that was going to put more freight on the canals, and about 300 people would tweet it to me and go, "It's worked!" Like 15 years later. So my best bet for making the world better would be that you should probably put more freight on the canals. It definitely seemed to engage people a few years ago, and every time it happens, it definitely seems to excite people. So, it's a tiny thing, but I think it would make the world a little bit better.
There you have it. Well, just do that.
Yeah.
Problem solved. Now, you also went on a bit of a Googlewhack adventure, as many of us do.
Yeah.
Now, I've got a question.
Yeah.
Does the art of observing a Googlewhack and telling other people about it potentially run the risk of it no longer being one?
Of course it does, but so what?
Exciting.
They're not... I used to get... Lots of people would have this sort of... So a Googlewhack was 2 words, no quotes. Google search leads to one result. It's no longer that because Google has changed, but that's what it was. And I wrote a book about them and did a show about them and whatever, and met people whose websites were responsible for them and whatever. And lots of people go, but you've ruined it, that's not a Googlewhack anymore. I go, you know, the internet's like alive, and it's growing, and new things are happening on it every day. And if you want them to forever be Googlewhacks, you want to preserve the internet in aspect, and we would all have to have that internet. We'd have to have the 2003 internet today, and that would be silly. That would be foolish. Of course things don't remain Googlewhacks forever, nor should they. Nor should anything remain the same forever. Life is meant to be changing and growing and doing new things, and that's, you know, I don't feel any guilt about them no longer being Googlewhacks. I think that's as the world should be.
I'm guilt-free about it too.
Good.
I wasn't, but now I am.
I persuaded you and brought you.
You have
brought you a place of peace and calm. Yeah, good.
You are, of course, very famous for being John the Postman and 24-hour Party People.
I'm not at all famous for it.
Well, I know that you are.
I know that the thing I did, but I'm not remotely famous for it.
So here's my question.
Yeah.
Do you ever sort of consider doing more acting and things like that?
No. I've never pursued it. I've been offered 2 acting gigs in my life, and I did them because they were fun to do. Weirdly, I had a lunch the other day with the woman who ran the youth theatre I was in when I was a teenager, and she spent part of the lunch saying, "You must do more acting, David. You must do more acting." But she is the only person I know of on earth who would be very keen for me to do more acting. I don't think I'm a very good actor. I think as a kid I was all right at it.
Yeah.
I think I was all right, and then stand-up comedy is such a different discipline, and you look an audience in the eye and you tell them the truth, and the fourth wall isn't there, and if you do that too much, you lose the ability to not look them in the eye and not tell them the truth, which is kind of what acting is, and I don't think it's in me anymore.
Yeah, but I suppose there's still that element of performance in that you're delivering the lines in a certain way and all that kind of stuff. It's just that the things you say happen to be true.
Well, it's not just that they are true. You're also that person in the room right now. That there's an honesty to that. Yeah. That you are watching me be me tell you stuff. Even if what I'm telling you isn't true, it's not acting in the same way that me pretending to be somebody else. Not talking to you, but talking to them, and you happen to be watching it. That's a different thing. I don't know. I just think I feel like if I was ever a decent actor, and a little part of me, and it's probably a large part of ego, thinks that at the age of 14 or 15 I was actually quite good. But who knows? I mean, I'm sure if I looked at any tape of me at 14, 15, I'd be absolutely awful. But whatever part of me thought I was good at that, I think I've killed by walking on stage 10,000 times and just looking people in the eye and telling them the truth and being me. And that's a different discipline, and it's just involves different muscles, and they're such hard muscles to not flex when you go on stage, that I think, you know, that's I don't feel like an actor at all, and I think my appearance in 24-hour Party People probably confirms for other people that I'm not really much of an actor.
Now, Modern Life is Goodish. I absolutely loved that show, really enjoyed it, except for the time when you had me panic that I'd accidentally bought a £365 lawnmower.
Yeah, I'm very proud of that.
I genuinely checked my bank account.
You're not alone. That every time it gets repeated, I get a flurry of tweets and emails from people who've fallen for it still. It has that effect whenever it's repeated. I so loved doing that, and the day we were constructing that in the writer's room, myself and sort of 3 or 4 mates, it's a joke that's working on at least 2 timelines and possibly 3. And at one point the audience at home are laughing at the people in the studio, and at another point the audience in the studio are laughing at the people at home, but the people at home don't exist yet because the people in the studio are at the recording and it hasn't been broadcast yet, but there's such certainty about how people at home will respond that it's making, and the idea of making people laugh at you in the future, it is bizarre, but something I'm very proud of. It's a lovely, weirdly constructed episode and a great bit of something to pull off, and exciting, and a great thing to have a team who are prepared to let you try and do that, because that could have absolutely gone wrong on the night, we had to install Wi-Fi in the building because it didn't have any. We had to install a particular version of it with a particular code. We had to make sure that people had enough people in the audience had downloaded QR code apps. We had to incentivize them in some way that you don't necessarily see happening on screen without letting on that they were going to be part of a thing. We had to set up one person, make sure we could seat them in a particular place. We had to there's so many weird things going on. Yeah. And there's that. We did another one where we were filming the audience in the interval. We used to record 2 shows on a night, and obviously they'd get broadcast separately, but it meant there was effectively an interval, and we recorded them in the interval, and in the interval cut the footage and put it into the PowerPoint for the second show. And TV people hate that degree of nervousness, that degree of uncertainty about what their content is. And we've got 20 minutes to take some footage that we shot 5 minutes ago and turn it into 10-15 slides of PowerPoint and edit it and put it in a show and film it. And if it goes wrong, if they haven't behaved in the way we were predicting they would behave, we haven't got a show. And the idea of persuading TV people to turn up and not know if they're going to have a show or not, most channels wouldn't touch that risk. Yeah. They need to have it locked down, and they need to know what they're getting in advance. And it was an absolute joy to work with people who were prepared to take those risks with me. It was beautiful.
Absolutely. And I still, every time I hear Pharrell Williams is happy, think of you as well.
It is lovely that anything stays with anyone. It's not what you do it for. I think comedy is meant to be a transient form, and you do it, and if they laugh that night, then it's fine. And the idea that comedy should stand the test of time is nonsense to me. I don't care if stuff stands the test of time. It should stand the test of tonight with that audience. That's it. Nothing else is needed. That said, it is absolutely delicious how many things from 5 years of shows still resonate with people and come back, and anything happens in the news or anywhere else. Like there was a tweet that went viral from someone a couple of days ago where some artist has been doing stuff with jigsaw puzzles.
Yes.
And the person who tweeted that tweet sent another tweet today saying the most common responses to this tweet are A, ha ha ha, I didn't know that. B, yeah, I knew that. C, yeah, Dave Gorman's already done that. And D, something else. And that's weird. That's from 4 years ago that I did a show about it, and a tweet comes along and 300 or 400 people have responded to his tweet going, oh, you should see that show that Dave Gorman did. And that's lovely. It's not what you demand of the show by any stretch, but it can only be lovely.
Yeah, I think when you watch stuff and enjoy it, it sort of stays with you in a way that even just hearing a song may not necessarily, but you sort of gave it a new angle, a new life, if you like, and sort of gave it a different story or interpretation that it didn't otherwise have.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think you can analyse that sort of stuff, and you can't think about it, and it can't be your reason for doing it. No. The only reason for doing it should be to make those people laugh tonight. That's it. If it happens to do anything else for other people afterwards, then that's all to the good. But it can't. I don't think it can ever be a motivation, or that you can ever plot to have that effect. I think the minute you're plotting things like that, an audience can smell your desperation. Looking back on that show,
what are your highlights from it?
I think the QR code one that you were talking about with the lawnmowers is a highlight, just because it was so intricately plotted and a bit fragile and could have gone wrong and didn't. And so I'm very sort of proud of the amount of work, not just from me, but from the whole team that went into making that actually happen, which is a real highlight. I think because when I started making the 5th series, I knew it was going to be the last, and I was absolutely determined that I didn't want anyone to think, oh, it's gone off the boil. Yeah, I can see why they've jacked it in. I was the one saying I think we should stop, and I wanted to make sure that the 5th series was as good as it could be. And I think the 5th series is better than the 4th. I think we've sort of actually went up a gear and threw ourselves at it. Within that series, there was an episode about toot cars, which again, somebody talks to me about once a day. And there was another episode, which I don't want to give anything away, but I would say cream balloons. And I think there's a kind of, inevitably, the people who are in my life are characters in the show, one way or another. So Mrs. Gorman becomes a recurring character, even though you never really see her in that show. And there was something deeply satisfying about, within that episode, she comes out so on top. But actually, for people who've invested in the series along the way, that's even more satisfying to see someone who has, I think lovingly, been the butt of some jokes along the way, actually come out in triumph sort of towards the end of the final series. I think it's sort of right and proper that she reigns supreme at the end of it, and it definitely it's sometimes, I think, you learn stuff by doing it, and sometimes there was a sense that in most shows there'd be something we used to refer to as the mischief. There'd be something where it wasn't just observations about the world was different because we had done this thing. And there's a sense, I think, sometimes from telly people at the beginning that the bigger that was, the better it was. And actually, in terms of reaction and feedback, sometimes the smaller it was, and if it happened purely on a domestic scale within my own household, it could be just as big as something that had made 2,000 people believe in a thing that didn't exist. It isn't about how big the mischief is. It's about something else. It's about emotive responses and whatever, and discovering that those small domestic dramas can be just as big as something that on paper is, hugely expensive and involves thousands of people and whatever, is quite an exciting discovery for someone who tells stories. It can be small and still be really powerful.
Yeah, definitely. You're in the third series of Taskmaster, and you came second overall. Yeah,
I know. I think 4 of us could have still won it in the final task. So it did go down to the wire.
There's of course been a Champion of Champions series now. They had an almost Champion of Champions series. Would you ever consider returning?
I would do Taskmaster again at the drop of a hat. It was the most fun gig to do. I'm a big fan of the show. I think I just enjoyed every second of it. I'm slightly annoyed, if anything, that we did. I think there are only 5 episodes in our series, and they've since done series of 8.
They've gone up to 10 now.
Now 10, and I wish I'd been in one of those. I wish I hadn't said yes. I wish I'd said, I'm too busy, come back to me in a couple of years, and then I could have had a longer series to be a part of, because it's just so safe. If you do something and you're good at it, that's funny. If you do something and you're bad at it, that's funny. It's not about humiliating people. It's not cruel like that. It's not sharp elbows like some panel shows are. It's very sharing, and the 5 contestants are part of an audience. I don't think people necessarily understand how much time has elapsed between doing your tasks and being in the studio watching them. So most of the time we'd forgotten what we did, so we're watching it anew. There was one, they did a sort of semi-pilot. I don't know why they did this, because they couldn't change the casting. We'd already all done the tasks, but they did, with the cast from series 3 and series 4, they did one night where they did sort of half a show with one cast and half a show with the other, just to sort of test the dynamics and see how people got on with each other and whatever. And then none of those tasks could go in the show, so they were kind of burned. And one of them was a portrait out of toilet paper of someone of a famous person or whatever. One of those things sort of shot like Art Attack, so from the ceiling looking down at a big black square. And they were showing my portrait of someone, and they're going, well, it depends who it is, really. Dave, who is it? I genuinely had no idea who had done. They had to tell me that it was a portrait of Mick Jagger. And when you knew it's a portrait of Mick Jagger, it was quite good. Yeah. But I had no recollection of who I'd done, because months had gone by between the recording of that and the studio, and your head's been so full of other stuff that you don't know. So that one of the ones that was in the series where I was accused of cheating.
Twice.
Oh no, more than that. But then you don't know how many times I got away with with cheats. But there was one on the running track where we had to get water into a cup or whatever. And the moment they went back to it and went, oh, by the way, we got this footage, and showed me cheating, is the moment in the studio that I remembered I had cheated. I wasn't watching that whole thing going, I think I've got away with cheating. I had no recollection of it having anything underhand going on at all until they outed me with some footage that showed me cheating. I was receiving that surprise at the same moment as the audience were, because you've done so many, you do so many in a day, and some of them don't get used and some of them do, and so we are part of the audience. We don't know anything about any of the other people's tasks. We're never there. We never see other people doing them apart from the team tasks. So we have no insight into any of that. So you've got a really good seat in the audience, basically, if you're on stage in that. And that's, I think that's the way to look at it. You just go, enjoy the show. You've got a really good seat. You're on the front row.
Very good view, yeah.
A very funny show, yeah.
So I helped, about 50 of us helped Rod Gilbert in one of his tasks for the last episode of the current series 7.
To see, so don't spoil.
I won't.
Yeah.
I'm in it a little bit.
Yeah, well, I've got 2 episodes to go in that series.
Have you?
Yeah. So I don't want to know any spoilers. Don't want to know who wins. Don't ruin it.
Never will.
No, good. But I mean, I know you're in it, but that's not. That could involve all sorts of things.
I could just be the end credits. It could be written on me, and I could be rolling across the screen.
It's unlikely, because that would involve Rod having a task to create end credits, and you and 50 people. I'm not buying that. Not buying that at all.
We did film that as well. That's a separate thing, and that's a premium rate video. Now, we are currently backstage at your current show, your current tour. Tell us briefly about it.
It is called With Great PowerPoint Comes Great Responsibility Point, which is the title you give to something when you haven't written it yet, because that's what they do these days. Tours are almost always on sale about a year in advance, and you haven't written the show yet. But I know I'm a double act with a PowerPoint screen, so I know that much about my own show. It is it's very hard to summarize, because the other thing, you want to not give spoilers away, but you want to be able to entice people. But this is one of the things, I always have this argument with people who write the blurb for shows, where they sort of go, great jokes about this, that, da, 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 da. And I go, no one has ever thought, what I want to see is great jokes about coffee makers, or whatever it happens to be. That's no one's... What they want to hear is great jokes. They don't care what they're about. They think they do. Anyone on stage, when people go, oh, what do you want? Biting political satire or knob jokes, is saying it because they've only got knob jokes. And men in a group feel macho, pretending, oh, I want knob jokes. But actually, if you're offering them shit knob jokes or really good biting political satire, they'll take the really good biting political satire.
They'll never take biting knob jokes.
No. Actually, they'd love biting knob jokes. But the knowing what it is about tells you nothing about what it is or how good it is, which makes me feel like it's such a difficult question to answer, because it's not it doesn't help to sell it. It doesn't, and you don't want to give any of the actual content away. There's something, a couple of reviews have sort of been very kind, but also sort of said, oh, it feels like it's about lots of little things, but actually it's about something bigger. And I think that's true, but I think if you think I set out to do that, you think I'm pompous, and I didn't. I set out to make a thing that's about lots of little things. I just can't help myself making that into something bigger. It is effectively Modern Life is Goodish live, because Modern Life is Goodish was always a version of what I do live, with a camera pointed at it rather than a format for telly. So it's that sort of stuff. If you've seen it, it's that kind of interaction. I mean, in an hour and a half, I go through about 800 slides of PowerPoint. So it's not, and I think people sometimes imagine that kind of PowerPoint stuff to be, and certainly other people do stuff where they're putting stuff on a screen and an image on the screen, and that becomes the topic of conversation for the next 10 minutes or whatever, and then they move on and just saying it's changing every 10 or 20 seconds in sometimes very small ways, pulling out details, doing stuff. It is actually a double act with a screen, that sometimes we're in agreement with each other, sometimes I'm saying one thing and the screen is saying another, sometimes it's the straight man, sometimes I'm the straight man, it does all sorts of different things. The main thing about it is it allows me to get comedy out of stuff that you shouldn't be able to get comedy out of. Like a lot of comedy works through some form of familiarity. So if you want to talk about advertising, you need the audience to know the advert. So you can talk about the Go Compare adverts or the Meerkat or whatever. But I don't want to talk about those because the audience already know about them, and the audience have already made those funny to themselves in the pub, and I don't think that's my job. But I can talk about very esoteric stuff that you've never encountered before, and it's okay because I'm going to guide you through the experience and show you all the information and show you my research. And at some point that also becomes a slight character comedy act, because then oh my god, he's the sort of person who's interested in that, becomes a part of it, and I just am. That's also actually just who I am. So without sort of overselling it or giving it away, there's sort of 15 minutes in this show about whether or not Toby Anstis is wearing a hat, and you can't do that unless you're doing stuff with PowerPoint and there's some other reason for that, and it always makes sense to the audience at the time. I think afterwards it's absolutely entirely possible that some people go away and go, why was I laughing at whether Toby Anstis was wearing a hat or not? It made sense at the time. And it's baby steps. Every little step in the logic always makes sense, and it ends up in a weird place, and you can't always retrace how you got there, which is one of my issues sometimes with the way things are sort of written about and capsule reviews and things. Someone has to write, I don't mean reviewers, I mean like the blurb or stuff for a show. They've only got 100 words to go in a brochure, and it makes it all sound willfully wacky or whatever. And it's never willfully wacky. It's always completely logical, and it always makes sense. It just ends up in some weird places. What can I tell you?
I'm very much looking forward to watching it and find out if he was indeed wearing a hat or not.
Well, time will tell.
Indeed it will. Now finally, have you got any messages for people watching the Sarah O'Connell show and your fans around the world?
Here's some footage of Alex Horne dancing.
And some more. Final question, do you still do rock balancing?
I do.
Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to share, subscribe, give the video a big thumbs up, and I'll see you all again soon for another episode of the Sarah O'Connell Show. Bye. Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome.